the Gab Talks by the Independent Press Award. I'm your hostess, Gabby Oldak. To participate in the 2024 Book Award competitions, please visit independentpressaward.com and NewYorkCityBigBookAward.com. This podcast will be speaking with G.E. Poole, aka Gary Ellis, author of Infrequent Frequencies, Rare Resonance, Untravelled Paths Through Natural, Practical, and Alternative Understandings of Your Life, Purpose, and Meaning. The work was named winner in the 2024 New York City Big Book Award in the philosophy category. Gary has always been interested in physics, logic, philosophy, and the quest for consciousness. At age 22, he entered the work through the J.G. Bennett line of transmission through the Claremont Society. In 1982, he migrated to New Zealand to become a pupil of Sufi Sheikh Abdullah Isa Dugan. After the passing of Abdullah in 1987, he continued to study and practice his teachings for more than 30 years. In 1990, he met Sufi master Irina Tweedy in London, and from 1992, Gary had substantial direct close personal contact with Taoist master Hua Xin-ni. Gary joins us from Queensland, Australia. Gary, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning.
Wonderful to see you. Congratulations. Welcome to the Gab Talks. Gary, let's just get started. Right off the bat, you refer to yourself as a nothing and nobody. You suggest to readers that they believe nothing at all written in the book. And this is a book that the author never intended or wanted to write. So, Gary, share with us why you did, in fact, write this book and how I understand the plight of young people inspired you to.
Yes, that's right, Gabby. That's what's the reason that I had been thinking about. I have written before, but mainly boring psychology texts over the course of my career. And I was seeing increasingly so many young people today around the world, really, who are disillusioned and who are higher levels of anxiety and depression than we ever saw in the past. I'm actually a registered psychologist by trade. And we really, the concern around that, because of the breakdown of many of the traditional family structures and religion, faith that people had, the traditional faiths, a lot of young people are floating and they are being subjected to quite a lot of disillusion and quite a lot of alienation from the rather dystopian world that they now find themselves in. And I really was writing it for the young people, for my grandchildren, my children, and my grandchildren, and for people to be able to have hope that there is actually a reason and purpose, and that it is quite beyond most of what we've been conditioned by our education and all of the institutions to believe.
Gary, share with us from your perspective how technology and materialism pose a threat and challenge to today's youth.
Well, increasingly, it's being seen in the way that young people are showing such levels of drug use, and that's always been there. But the way in which it's the violence that is increasing, the senseless violence, and all of the problems that we're facing, they have been there, but now they're greatly magnified. Now, the reason for this, in my view, is because we are approaching the great filter, which is what Robin Hanson talked about several years ago. And the great filter is for any species that is a conscious species, which human beings are, to a greater extent or a lesser extent. And we are approaching the great filter, and that will determine if a civilization, if a species cannot pass through the great filter and pass the tests as uh, a successful vehicle of consciousness, then they are destined to extinction, self-destruction, usually by self-destruction. And that is one of the reasons we don't find so a large number, we haven't yet found a large number of other civilizations and species that have evolved in around the near part of our the near part of our solar, so beyond our solar system. We haven't found those yet. We haven't made direct contact because it is rare to pass through the great filter, and we are now our whole civilization, our whole species is now rapidly approaching the great filter, and it's this descent into um, materialism, into the profit motive, and into really a sense of hopelessness that so many young people seem to be experiencing today.
Gary, Infrequent Frequencies is a fervent discussion that integrates science, philosophy, faith, and personal growth. And I really appreciate it's a large book, over 400 pages. I really appreciated the conversational tone of the book, in spite of the gravity of the subject that you cover. In a sentence or two, Gary, can you share with our listeners or viewers um, how you define infrequent frequencies, what it is?
Well, the infrequent, everything is vibration, and there is some physics and some conventional science that's supporting that view that there's in terms of the our increasing understanding through quantum physics of how the universe appears to operate, it isn't in the way that we had always assumed, and it is frequency, the vibrations, since everything is vibration, that is more than just material beginnings. And that means that materiality is simply, you could say, put it this way, the material world is water in the form of ice. The material, beyond that, there is liquid water. And beyond that, there is vapor, steam, clouds. Now, it's all water, but it takes different forms. And the material world that we inhabit, the three-dimensional material world, is only one small part of the entire spectrum. Yet we take it to be reality. And that's part of some of the more recent ideas that we're living in a simulation. We take it, and it goes all the way back to Plato's cave. We take it to be reality when it isn't. We're only able to perceive a small part of the spectrum. Therefore, the material world, yes, it exists. It exists on one level, but it's simply another manifestation going back. The real world is actually spiritual. It is beyond the 3D material world. So that was the point. And that's where the physics, that's where the science is traveling. Despite all the skepticism, and which is pay due respect to skepticism, but we're beginning to understand that everyone has the potential to raise our consciousness and at the same time to raise our vibration. And by raising the vibration, we begin to resonate differently. And there are very rare people alive today, here on Earth, who resonate at a very different, very high frequency. And those are the people that ordinarily would be referred to as enlightened, if that makes sense.
It actually does make sense. Thanks for clarifying that. In fact, Gary, you have said that all of humanity owes a debt of gratitude to India. Expounds on this statement and how it relates to resonance beings.
Well, every region and every nation has contributed what I call resonance beings. But the India has contributed because it is a very old, ancient civilization, it has contributed perhaps the greatest proportion. And I'll give you some examples of the 20th century. The arrival of Vivekananda in America around the turn of the between the 19th and 20th century was pivotal in terms of bringing the ideas of the for the Hindu religion, but vastly what were called Eastern faiths, Eastern religions, and expanding the scope of the thinking of the people at that time. And Vivekananda was an exceptional, extraordinary man who was indeed what we call a human number five. He was much more highly evolved, a very exceptional person. And there are others of the 20th century that are also introduced in the book, and some of them are known to the widespread mainstream um, population. Many are not, and those people are the ones that actually are helping humanity along and guiding. They're so sometimes have been called the masters of wisdom, and many of them, some of them have become known. Many of them are not known, or rather obscure.
Gary, of the numerous spiritual leaders that you've studied under, who has had the most profound influence on your life and your belief systems?
Well, my immediate teacher was Abdullah Dugan, who he was from Australia and he died in 1987. So I had the years 1982 to 1987 with him personally as one of his pupils, and that had the most profound influence of me. And indeed, I migrated to New Zealand to become his pupil. So, but prior to that, I had um, direct influence by John G. Bennett, who was from England. And John Bennett was a pupil, a disciple of George Gurdjieff. And so it was through that, and George Gurdjieff had a huge impact on the course of thinking and consciousness in America and around the world, because he was also what we call a human number five. He was quite an exceptionally evolved, as was Vivekananda. And Ramakrishna, who was Vivekananda's master, his teacher, was actually a human number four. He was not as advanced as Vivekananda became. So when the pupil advances beyond the teacher, that's quite exceptional.
Hmm. Tell us about the experiment of consciousness. You said that species of human beings are an experiment of consciousness. Elaborate on this and what it means to us as a race.
Everyone is looking for a purpose, and whether we know it or whether we don't, many people are quite content to just live their lives without thinking about why we're here or what the purpose is. But other people look toward faith and religion. Some people look toward science. Everyone's trying to find what's the meaning of all this? Why are we here? And this is an alternative understanding of why we're here. We're here because nature put us here or evolved us here. And we're here for the purpose because we are part of an experiment of consciousness. And that experiment is part of the reason that we are evolving and have evolved in the ways that we have.
So you've said, Gary, that spiritual work, part of this consciousness, is a journey. How do we get simple folks that we are? How do we get started on this? How do we embark on this journey?
This is raising one's vibration is nothing more than improving ourselves. It's nothing more than that. It's just that simple. It's just that simple.
How do we go about that? Improving ourselves in what ways?
Well, very practical ways. That's what the book is about. It doesn't take any high-flown, airy-fairy ideas. We don't need to be flying in spaceships with crystals. All we need to do is actually work on what's in front of our noses. If we are greedy, then we need to become more giving. Yeah. If we are selfish, then we need to be more selfless. Yeah. If we are what we're doing, and by doing that, we're struggling against the negativities. And what we're doing is we're raising our vibration is raising. And as part of that, the spiritual component of us is actually growing and developing. And it's things that we can do are very practical, simple things. Selfless service, serving other people in a conscious way without reward. Doing things like fasting intentionally. All the things that are very practical, and it's all of these techniques are outlined in the book. These have the purpose of transforming, changing our vibration. And as part of that, we contribute to the common consciousness. And as part of that, we begin to help the entire species advance further toward fulfilling what is our purpose.
Gary, thanks for simplifying for us all of that for us. And folks can read your book. And as you said, all of this is outlined. So further, elaborate a little bit more on knowing our source and what that means. It ties into what you just said.
Well, there will be, of course, the range of opinion, and I've been interested to look at the reviews. There have been now reviews from around the world on the book. And so far, because it's only been out for a few months this year, and the difference in terms of the understanding is if people have what's called a magnetic center, and about half the population living of how many of us are now inhabiting this common life-sustaining planet, 8 billion or so is estimated. There are about half the population come in with a magnetic center. And that means that they are inclined to seek some higher power. They may define that by, it may be defined very narrowly by a particular faith or a sect within a faith, or it might be defined by even the person who is agnostic who says, well, there's something there, or something higher, but I don't know what it is, but I know something's there. And those people have the potential and really the drive to develop themselves spiritually. And out of that group, they are trying to also raise the conscience. Now, the conscience is a very important component, and it's not just some vague moral code like it's been portrayed in many ways. What the conscience is, it's actually it's the active force of the sun. And what it is a very powerful inner guidance system. And people that bury the conscience lose their inner guidance system. And when they begin to bury the conscience deeper and deeper, this explains why people behave in ways that are called evil. The reason is simply because they've lost their internal guidance system, and they're capable of carrying out all range of crimes and different actions as a result of having lost that inner guidance system. So what we're doing through working on ourselves is we are consciously beginning to get in touch with our inner guidance system. And that guidance system, when we begin to do that, will direct us in ways that are going to cause us to rise rather than descend.
And Gary, you say that the evidence has been hiding in plain sight. So where is it?
Well, it's
and what?
In New York. It's now around maybe 6:30 in the evening, and
Yes.
it'll be autumn. It'll be autumn in New York, and here and it's on the other side of the world. We're going into spring. When tomorrow morning, wake up early and go look at the sun, and just stare at the sun, and just for a few moments, right before the sun rises, notice what happens. Everything goes quiet. The birds are chirping, everything's happening. There's life in all its fullness. The Maori say, Ti he wa, Maori ora, behold the life force. And then just notice the silence. And when you see the sun coming up, you will see that it's pulsing. Now, many people don't understand, and traditional religions originally had the understanding that the sun and the earth are actually living conscious beings. Now, this is not sun worshipping as the old pagans used to do. The sun and the earth have spiritual dimensions, just as we do. They are three brain beings. They have an instinctive moving center, they have an emotional center, and they have an intellectual center. So they are not the ultimate form of God, but they are a manifestation of God. Even every skeptic, even the most adamant skeptic, materialist skeptic, would have to acknowledge that we would not exist without the sun. That's and it's not worshiping the sun. You're not worshiping the outer form of the sun, but the sun is a highly conscious being. It's not just a ball of hydrogen, floating out there among innumerable stars. And the balance between the earth and the sun is the secret to life. It's the balance and consciousness. Balance is the key to higher consciousness. Lack of balance is unconsciousness. So, one of the principles, and it's outlined clearly in the book, was around James Lovelock. James Lovelock was an extraordinary, relatively recent pioneer. He only died at the age of 101, I think, about 2 or 3 years ago. And James Lovelock, with his Gaia, introducing the Gaia concept, he was virtually pilloried by the academic community, but he was an extraordinary man, and he understood that the earth was indeed an extraordinary, not just a complex system of interrelated phenomena, but was actually, there was a consciousness, and now that idea has grown. Now, it's an ancient idea, but it's finally coming back into our consciousness. And if we understand that the earth is literally our holy mother, then we will begin to have a different attitude toward her.
And that is the most profound evidence that is hiding in plain sight.
Yes, that all of the people are looking for God. Where's God? And he's, God's here, and this is what he looks like. He's right. A sky father up, and now he's got a long beard, and all of these different conceptions are trying to understand what is this higher power that is. Well, we were created by these two. We were created by. Can anyone argue against the fact that we are created by the sun and the earth? Now, what the leap is to begin to, and people can have to reach this on their own, to begin to understand that the earth is not just soil and rock and minerals and magma. That, yes, just like our bodies, those things exist, but the earth is actually a conscious being, highly advanced beyond us, and that we are part of her. And I think many of the ancient traditional cultures here in Australia, the Aboriginal, in many of the Native American cultures across America, they all knew this.
They've embraced that. Yes, that's so true. Gary, how do you recommend folks read this book?
Look, I appreciate this is a difficult book to read because, and that's what one of the most insightful reviews has actually came from India, from a literary reviewer in India, who he really got the book, and he said, "Look, it's not easy. It requires mental gymnastics." And the reason that it's written as it is, I would not have written the book at all, or written it in the way that I did. But this stuff, I can't describe. It just came through, and I wrote it in the way that it had to be written, not the way that necessarily I would have written it, and to make it more easily accessible to readers. Um, for example, if you try to read any of Gurdjieff's work, um, it's very obscure and it's difficult, but making the effort actually wakes you up.
Yes, I
And
could understand.
and these are, we're covering a huge broad spectrum of ideas and trying to bring together the strands of different threads of knowledge, all the way from particle physics through biology and science, and all the way through mysticism. So we're trying to weave together a fabric from these various strands. And it was, I knew that it was ambitious, which it took so long to actually, I was resisting even writing the book because of some of the controversial ideas that it introduces. But um, the reason it's written that way, it requires study. It's something like, and I myself have studied books that were difficult because it requires the use of all three brains. We have three brains. We have the moving instinctive center, we have the emotional center, and we have the intellectual center, and it requires the use of all three brains.
It most certainly does. But the way you have written the book, it is in a more conversational tone, so it is approachable.
Yes, thank you. I tried to do that, and I was writing it in a way like I was having a chat with a friend, or just telling this to my grandchildren.
Like right now, for example, during our interview, I mean, you clarified a lot of points that may have seemed very obscure to some people, but the book is very interesting. Uh, Gary, what is your hope for humanity?
I believe that I do have a lot of hope for humanity. I believe that every person has a higher part and a lower part. We have a lower animal part because we evolved from that, but we also have a higher spiritual part. And it's a battle between those two. And we have the capability of transcending ourselves, of actually uh, raising our consciousness. Individually, we can do that. Absolutely. And that contributes to the common consciousness. So my hope is that, yes, I believe that despite the way that things look presently in the year 2024, 2025, things are relatively, with global warming, pollution, war, all the things that have been happening throughout our lifetimes, accelerating. We are approaching the great filter, but I have hope that the human species, we will become a successful vehicle of consciousness.
I hope so as well. Gary, what is your life mantra when you wake up every day in Australia? What do you say to yourself?
Victory to the truth and triumph to the invincible sun. Yes, I say victory to the truth, because the problems that we face are through the darkness of human ignorance. And
Victory.
the truth, actually, the old biblical phrase that the truth will set us free, and going back to Plato, even, yes, the truth will set us free.
Thank you so much. So, are you working on any other projects? How long did it
Yes,
take to write this book, Gary?
it took a long time in terms of, I hesitated for so long. I think a number of some of the reviewers asked me that in interviews, that it took. I was reluctant because I don't think that I have. Who am I to, um, to actually expound such truths? But I think it was needed, and no one else was doing it. And the books, however, there are very direct sources of this available, from my teacher, who passed away in 1987, and many others, like Irina Tweedy. She was an extraordinary person. She was herself a human number five, and I had the privilege of meeting her in London in 1990. And so I've had the privilege of uh, being in direct contact with some of these people. And their books, I highly recommend Mrs. Tweedy, and I highly recommend my own teacher, Abdullah Dugan. That's the direct source. This is an introduction, nothing more than an introduction from someone who is a pupil, still a pupil, making a sincere effort.
So what you did mention that you are working on other projects, Gary. What's happening? What can you share
Well,
with us?
well, I was I worked in Afghanistan for 2 years, from 2004 to 2006, working in humanitarian aid there. And during that time, when we were long periods of time when we were locked down because of security issues. And I had completed a novel then, which takes place in Nepal, and it is based on a true story of a young woman there. And so I lost that manuscript after I came back from Afghanistan, but it was recovered off of an old floppy disk recently by
Wow.
a tech expert down in Melbourne. So we've recovered the manuscript, so I'm now working on that. Yeah,
That's a
and
positive aspect.
it talks about some of these ideas, but in the form of a novel. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds so interesting. Do you have a pub date or that it's a work in progress?
Well, it's actually the manuscript was finished, but I'm not satisfied with it. It's got a lot of work to be done to it. Yeah.
Okay, well, we look forward to it. So, lastly, Gary, how can our readers find out more about G.E. Poole and purchase your book, Infrequent Frequencies?
Well, it's on, of course, Amazon, and this in the last. It's only recently been published, but it's published by a small publisher in Adelaide called Greenhill Publishing, and but it's selling a lot of sales through Amazon, but also Goodreads particularly. It's doing very well on Goodreads and Barnes and Noble, all the major booksellers, and on the online sales, there's a lot of interest there. The idea here is not to sell books; it's really to get these ideas out. These ideas are timely for everyone, but particularly for young people. And I wish I could have conveyed them in a simpler way that would allow them to become more accessible. So that's why we're looking at working on an audiobook.
An audiobook would most definitely be more accessible for young people. It
Yeah.
you for a lot of very interesting perspectives, and I think that young people, if it's in an audio form, that's how they read books nowadays. I know that's how my children read books, so that would um,
That's what all my children that's what I got all my children have said to me, and they said, you really got to put this into audio. Yes, yeah, how to do that. I'm working on it. Yeah.
I agree. Well, let us know as soon as that happens, and we'll get the
Mm.
information out there to our readers and our viewers.
Well,
Well,
thank
Gary,
you.
thank you so much for speaking with us today. This was really wonderful. I appreciate your time, waking up so early for us in Australia, and it was great meeting you.
Thank you. It's great to meet you as well, and I wish you well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Join us next podcast when we chat with Christina Vitigliano about her memoir, Every 9 Minutes. This is your hostess, Gabby Olzak of the Gab Talks. Until next time, keep on reading.